Okay, so Be'ezras Hashem, we are continuing with our shirim on the Mitteler Rebbe's Shaar HaYichud, which is the second volume of Ner Mitzvah V'Torah Or. And with the introduction from last week, with the understanding that what the Mitteler Rebbe is going to do for us is bring us into a face-to-face encounter with the particularities of the Yichud, with the various points in which that essential point of unity takes shape in and across the proliferation of details in our lives. So that while when looking at unity, one would assume that we would utilize chachma of the mind, which is looking at things in one fell swoop. Nevertheless, when we encounter the Shaar HaYichud, the gates of Yichud, what the Mitteler Rebbe first and foremost has us encounter is the framework of Bina, hisboinenus, contemplation, which is not the simple unity of Chachma, but rather it's the proliferation of the details. And like we said, it's specifically the Mitteler Rebbe who shows us through the descent into Bina how we come to a deeper understanding. And this is the language of the Mitteler Rebbe Be'ezras Hashem on Daf Beis. Os Aleph. Hine kvar mevuar ba'arichos bekuntris miyuchad beprate ofane ha'hespa'alus b'moyach ubelev ub'machshava shenolad min ha'hesboinenus lefi seder he madregos naranchai v'chule. We said last week that ultimately the Mitteler Rebbe gave us three kuntrasim that were matim to each and every person. As the Maharash pointed out, most Svarim were written for specific purposes, but there were three Svarim that were written for each and every Yid. There was Shaar HaYichud, which is ultimately what we're looking at. Kunshas has Pa'alus, which is the question of ecstasy and the question of the utilization of the body in the process of its avodah, and Sha'ari Ora, which are Drushim on Chanukah and Purim. So the Mitteler Rebbe is pointing out that we've already explained in Kunshas has Pa'alus, in the order of the gradations of the soul on the level of the nefesh, on the level of the body, of the ruach, the emotional frequency, the neshama, the mind, which has expression in our own consciousness, the chaya and the yechida, the two surrounding parts of the self. The Mitteler Rebbe already went through all of the particular valences of hispa'alus, of awakening, and the ecstatic movement of the self when it encounters godliness, both in the mind as well as in the heart, in thought, not externalized, but rather in the silent, humble place of thought that is born and emerges as a result of hisboinenus, that comes about by way of the contemplation of the mind, referred to as hisboinenus, which is from the language of Bina. It's not chachma, it's hisboinenus, it's contemplation, it's descending down into an idea over and over in accordance with the levels of the self. But now, after having explained very clearly the method in which a person experiences the contemplation of these ideas, what Shaar HaYichud is coming to do for us is coming to give us the content of what we should contemplate. Kuntris HaHesboinenus describes how to contemplate, and Kuntris of Shaar HaYichud explains what to contemplate. And that's what the Mitteler Rebbe is explaining now. We've already explained in the Kuntris as to how to contemplate. And now what we're going to be looking at is Me'ati yesh levayer hetiv b'mohus guf inyan ha'hesboinenus. We have to try and understand what exactly is the notion of contemplation, not necessarily the outgrowth of contemplation in the body and the emotions itself, but rather the guf of contemplation. What is it? Mahi be'etzem. What is the essence of hisboinenus? Ubama yisbonin. And furthermore, once we identify what the essence of contemplation is, of this inner looking or this inner hearing, then we can also come to a place of understanding the what of what we should be contemplating. So Kuntras as Paulus describes the emotions and the body in awakening to the realization of what we're contemplating. Shaar HaYichud is what is contemplation and what should we be contemplating. So it seems that the Mitteler Rebbe is starting with the lower part, which is the reaction of the body and the emotions, Kuntras as Paulus, and then coming to the higher level of Kuntras HaHesboinenus. And that's very often the model of Na'aseh v'nishma. Na'aseh is the world of Asiya. How does a person encounter their bodies in this world? How does a person encounter hispa'alus, the five frameworks of awakening of the body and the soul that is engarbed within the body in the process of coming to find HaKadosh Baruch Hu in those states of ecstasy, internal and external. And only once we've refined the way that the body and the emotions can respond to things, then we can have the realm of nishma, which is what the hisboinenus is. The ikr is the maisa. First, we have to understand how to live as human beings in this world. Then then we come to understand the inner frequency and the inner framing of how to function as human beings. First, it starts with Nasa, which is Kuntrus HaEspalus, and then we go back to Nishma, which is Shaar HaYichud, which is the Kuntrus of Hisboinus. So now the Mitteler Rebbe is explaining, once we know how we should properly do things, now we can try and understand what is the thing that we have to do and what are the things that we should be thinking about when we properly understand what needs to be done. Zok the Heilige Mitteler Rebbe. Hine mohus ha'espoinus be'etzem hu inyan ha'histaklus ha'chazaka be'amkus ha'inyan. When it comes to understanding the essence of contemplation, the essence of hisboinus, of contemplation, in its essential form, we can describe it as follows. It is a strong inner looking at the depth of the matter. Histaklus chachazaka be'amkus ha'inyan, looking deeply at the matter. La'amod alav harbe, to stand upon it over and over, not to allow my mind to run past the inyan, but rather to hold myself and prevent myself from moving forward to the next inyan, but rather contemplating this inyan until I have a proper grasp of it, by way of the histaklus hachazaka be'amkus ha'inyan, the deep looking at the depth of the matter. Ad sheyavin oso al boirav, to the degree that I come to understand the parts that compose it in their depth. Mikol chelkav beprate protius, to understand the interconnecting parts that make this thing a whole, not simply to look over it at a first glance and to see it in its totality, but to then just move on to something else, but rather to hold myself, la amod alav harbe, to be patient in thinking, to trust the process of thinking, to treat thinking properly, and to allow our minds to settle upon something, to return back to something, even though we have the natural tendency to run past it. La amod alav harbe, ad sheyavin oso al borov, to the degree that I come to understand, I find the particular parts that make up this whole, and I come to understand the composite parts and how they interact with one another. All of this only takes place when I stand upon the matter without running to something else, and I allow myself to gaze deeply beneath the external surface where things appear to be working in a unified way, and I allow my mind to give shape to the multiplicity and the frequencies of connection that are giving shape to this thing. That's ad sheyavin oso al boirav b'chol chelkav beprate protius, the particularities of the particularities. V'hu b'chinas penimius bina. And what this hisboinus, is the depth of penimius of Bina. The Pnimius of Bina, which we said last week, is what the Mitteler Rebbe represents. The Pnimius of Bina is the recognition that, on the one hand, there's Chachma, which is the holistic approach to things and the clarified vision of something. On the other hand, there's Bina, which is the fragmentation of that whole and the descent into particularity and the encounter with Gevura and the encounter with restriction. And even though when balanced one against the other, Chachma, which represents ayin and nothingness and simple unity, seems to far outweigh the spiritual level of Bina, which represents ani and separation. Nevertheless, what the Mitteler Rebbe is teaching us is that once you descend down away from the chachma of the Baal HaTanya, and you enter into the Bina of what the Mitteler Rebbe is giving us, we'll come to find that the descent into Bina provides us with a newfound insight into the Chachma itself of the Baal HaTanya that could not have been gained without the descent into the particularity and the fragmentation. So in the depth of Bina, which at first glance appears to be a degradation from the spiritual level of Chachma, we come to behold the pnimius of Bina, the inner interiority of Bina, which is the chalakim of Keser that rest within Bina, which is the benefit that comes about from the descent into the particularity of things. At first glance, a chachma mind wants to grasp everything. It wants to see the whole image. It wants to understand everything. Bina is patient and willing to say, Eheke, ana zamin lemeheve. I know that I think I can move past this thing, but instead of moving past it with the natural tendency of the soul to devour more, I'm going to restrict myself, be mitzamsim myself, and I'm going to spend time contemplating the depth of the matter so that I can understand the particular points that make up this idea so that it becomes something that's pnimius of Bina. Hanikra b'lashon hagamara b'shem iyun. This histaklus pnimi, hachazaka ba'amkos ha'inyan, this inner vision that descends down to the depth of the matter, that demands the patience of thinking to stand upon the matter to the degree that I'll come to understand the particular parts that make up the whole, which is referred to as the interiority of Bina. This is what the Gemara refers to as iyun learning, as contemplation in a deepening way where I descend down further and further into the point itself. Kamosha Amar, as Chazal have told us in Maseches Sukkah, ha lemigras ha le'iyuni, meaning to say, when it comes to sitting in a sukkah, a person is only meant to do things that bring them pleasure and that bring them the notion of Teshvu Kein Teduru. And a person has to live in the sukkah with calmness. And therefore, when a person is learning, a person can learn begirsa. A person can learn, Chazal say, begirsa externally. They can contemplate the notion that they're learning. But iyuna, the depth vision, the contemplation of the depth of the matter that rests beneath the surface, that gives me a vision into the inner workings and the buzzling kind of particularity of all things, that iyun, which causes the mind to sweat and causes the mind to churn itself like the burning oven of Bina, so that already is going to be something that a person shouldn't do in the sukkah because it demands an intensity of mind. So we see that Chazal have this notion of iyun, which is, as the Mitteler is saying, is this histaklus hachazaka ba'amkas inyan, this deep look and this deep gaze into the depth of the matter, not to be caught by external appearances, but rather to stand upon the matter, to I come to understand the particular parts that make up this element in the inner interiority of my Bina. That's what iyun is. That's what depth learning is. That's what descending down into the matter is about. Meaning to say, says the Mitteler Rebbe, Perush, Hagirsa hu rak havanas hadavar bahashkafa rishona shaholeches v'nove'es b'mehirus bilti ikuv v'ha'amada klal ki yadua adalach mashal hamabit be'eno al davar ma ve'eno mitbonin klal al hadavar be'ikuso u'mehuso b'chol chelkav hapnimim v'chitzaynim rak dervech ma'avir ba'alma shebemechel shman vada yishkach alav legamre. Now to translate the words that we just read, Chazal tell us that girsa, external learning, is just the basic understanding that comes about by way of the first glance at something that looks at it and moves quickly past it without taking any time to focus or to be patient with the thought. For example, somebody who looks very quickly with their eyes on something but doesn't contemplate the depth of what their eyes are seeing in its quality or its quantity in all of the various parts, that means that a person has just glanced over the thing, but in a certain amount of time, it's going to be forgotten completely because they haven't descended into the depth of the matter. That's girsa. V'gam lo yuchol lesaper lezuloso rak klalius inyan oso hadavar shera'or b'havaras ha'ayin v'lo b'tvias ayin klal. And so too, if all I do is glance at something at an external level without standing upon the matter, all I grasp is the klalius ha'inyan, the general principle of the matter, so that I saw with the quick glance of the eye and that I didn't descend down into the depth of it, so I can't convey what I've seen to anybody else because all I have is the external shape. That's girsa. V'chein havaras ayin haseichel be'iz svara b'hashkafa rishona bilti ikuv v'ha'amada la'ayin b'heitev v'lo yada b'svarazu l'tachlisa klal. And so too with regards to a way of study and a way of learning and a way of consciousness and a way of contemplation, when the eye of the mind gazes upon a certain principle of thinking with the external way of looking at things externally without spending too much time to descend down into it and to be patient with it and to analyze it properly so that I can understand its depth, so that I'll never come to truly understand the nature of the thing, because it's just a havara ba'alma. That's girsa. That's when I'm not engaged in Panemius of Bina. When I'm only looking at things from a perspective of Chachma, all it is a quick look. I'm gaining a perspective of the map, but I'm not descending down into the territory of the thing itself. I'm not descending into the particularity that compose that thing. And yes, I can see something in its beautiful unified form, but that first glance, without any deliberate patience necessary of descending down into the parts of that idea and reviewing the idea over and over and finding the different application across the horizontal and vertical perspectives of thinking, as we're going to see, so that I'm only going to have a very externalized perspective of something. And furthermore, I won't be able to share anything with anybody because all I'll have is a hashkafa rishona. And when it comes to defining what the thing is, it will just be expressed by way of this benign generalization as opposed to this descent down into the particularity of it, which demands a stoppage of thought. It demands the gevura of the mind. It demands the bina of the mind. It demands the severity of thinking that says, ad kan tavo, I'm not going to let the thought move forward without deepening my thought. It's going deeper and deeper. That's the secret of Panemius of Bina. That's the secret of iyun as opposed to girsa. Zak the Heilige Mitteler Rebbe. Ki hine gimel devarim hu sheyesh bechol davar muskal. Oimek ve'orech ve'rochev. Now, everything that we're trying to understand here is, what does it mean to contemplate something? What does it mean to think about something? What does it mean to be mizboinin on something? So we know Chazal tell us, and the Rambam brings down, and the Baal Tanya brings down, and all of the tzaddikim bring down, that the unity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the unity of the seichel, the maskil, and the muskal. That the unity of the thinking individual with the thing that is being thought and the process of thinking is reflective of the inherent unity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu with creation, and creation with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That in applied metaphorics, when we apply it to ourselves, the mind is a thinking thing, and then there is the process of thinking, and then there is the thing that is being thought about. So when the mind, which is the seichel, grasps a muskal, something that is being thought about, by way of haskala, by way of contemplating it. So there's a unity between the mind that is thinking, the act of thinking itself, and the thing that is being thought about. But ultimately, the thing that we're trying to uncover is the muskal, the thing that is being thought about. Every muskal, every emergent point of conscious information is a moment of giloy from above through the Seder Ishtalshalis that the mind can come to grasp and know. And ultimately, when the mind knows what it grasps and it comes to that place of the yichud in the mind, but machshava is bariru, that's the place of the hamtakas adinim, and that means that we've received more insight and more light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in our lives. That's the avoida, to be the maskilim sheyaziru kazara hierarchia, to live with a seichel, to take that difficulty of tashlichuhu, of throwing Yiddishkeit into the water, and to transform that tashlichuhu and that tossing away into the light of taskiluhu, to understand something deeply. That's the light of the seichel, the or hamuskal. Muskal is a point of revelation, and therefore the mind, which is the seichel, and the tool of thinking, which is the maskil, are all trying to grasp the muskal. But the muskal is the thing that is emergent into reality that I'm trying to contemplate. And I can either look at it externally by way of girsa, which is just chachma without the descent into bina, where yes, I get the full picture, but no, it's not going to convey any depth of understanding. Or there's the descent into the particularization, which is Bina, and even though that appears to be a descent, when I uncover the interiority of Bina, I come to find that through iyun and through the patience of thinking and the severity of thought and the willingness to descend down into the same prat over and over and over and over again, so that I can properly integrate it into myself, rather than trying to cover more ground like the lens of Girsa and Chachma. So then I come to find the benefit that's going to come about by way of Bina. And what happens is there's a muskal. There's a muskal, there's something that is revealed. And to every muskal, to everything that is revealed, there are three levels of accessibility. There are 3 points at which a person can come to access that thing. There's going to be the oimek, there's the depth of the matter. There's going to be the orech, there's going to be the height of the matter, or the elongation of the matter in a vertical way. And there's going to be the rochev, which is going to be the extension and the width of the matter, and the extension in a horizontal way. Now, these 3 elements, oimek, oirich, and rochav, the depth, the length, and the width, which compose each and every thing, which is the inner, the middle, and the outer, or the top, the bottom, and the middle, or the right, left, and the center, or the chesed, the din, and the rachamim, or Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, or chachma, bin, and das, or all of the groupings of 3 that we can imagine. So these 3 frames or handles where the mind can grasp reality apply to each and everything. There's the depth of the matter, there's the extension of the matter from above to below, and there's the extension of the matter from the left to the right, the width of the matter. Now, this is Chachma, Bina, and Das. Chachma is the oirech. Chachma is the length of the thing, as the Rebbe Rashab explains very clearly on this Nakuda in Sefer HaMa'amarim, Shnas Pei Reish Taf, on Daf Tzadi Tes. The Rebbe Rashab explains exactly why Chachma is referred to as Oirech, but ultimately Chachma is the ability for an idea, that muskal, to descend down from above to below by way of applied metaphors, transforming that idea from its lofty level down below so that it can be translatable to levels below. The rochev, the width of an idea, is the bina, which is going to be the extension of the idea being applied in different ways. The oirich is the same idea. There's one nakuda of an idea. There's the chachma of the idea. And then we're holding on the chachma of the idea. And by holding on to the chachma of the idea, we're able to translate it into metaphors and analogies that each level can go down so that it becomes accessible to the lower levels, but the content is not changing. The secret of the mashalim, the secret of the metaphors of chachma and dail chakima biramiza is that once I understand the depth of the matter, once I understand the chachma shebedavar, so then I have the ability of abstracting that innermost point of chachma and drawing it down from above to below to each sequential lower level by way of applying it across metaphors, by taking the light and applying it to metaphors of light and vessels, or teacher and student, or parent and child, or person with action. I am taking that singular idea of chachma, and I'm not changing the idea of chachma, I'm just translating it across boundaries of metaphoricity, and I'm allowing that idea to now come down from a higher level to a lower level. It can be accessed now in accordance with all levels. That was the chachma of the Mashalim. That was Shlomo Melech's ability to understand a nakuda in its depth, and then to bring it down on the level of its oirech, to apply it across the board. The width of the matter, the rochev of the matter, is very different. It's not abstracting the innermost point of the thought and finding external levushim and other forms in which I can convey the idea. That's what the orech of the idea is. There's the idea, and then it can be applied across the board. So we talk about how HaKadosh Baruch Hu's infinite light was infinitely present prior to the creation of the world, and then that infinite light emerges outside, so to speak, for the creation of the world. So in order to understand that idea on a level of orech, I have to now abstract the inner nakuda of the relationship between the infinite light and the finite expression. And then I can look at it from the lens of a teacher-student. And just as the teacher's understanding is infinite in relationship to the student's unknowing, so too the process of teaching can be understood in the process of infinitude expressing itself in a finite way. That's the oirich of a matter. That's where the idea is above. And then in order to draw it down below to someone who can understand it, who doesn't know the terms and conditions of the higher level, I uncover a secret metaphor that contains the same punch of the idea, but it's just being given over in levushim, in garments of the mind that are accessible to a lower level. So it's the same idea. It's not extending itself. It's just expressing itself lower down. That's the chachma. The rochev of an idea, which is bina, the rechovas hanahar, is that I'm not finding new levushim for the idea. I'm actually extending the applicability of the idea. I'm no longer going down in a hierarchical way from above to a lower level. I'm dealing with the idea itself, but I'm trying to understand the depth of the applicability of the idea. So, for example, if I come to understand that the lave is Bina and that Bina has a higher level sometimes than Chachma, so then that means the lave is also going to have a higher level sometimes of the mind, and that everything that is said about Bina can be said about the lave as well, and can be said about Torah Shabbal Peh, and can be said about the smol, and can be said about Gevura, and it can be said about the Meichas Tima'a, meaning it's applying the idea that I'm grasping, but extending it into all of the particular applications of the idea. It's not metaphoricity. I'm not finding an analogy that can translate the depth of the idea to a level that doesn't have accessibility to the depth. That's the oirech of it. That's where it's the secret of a mashal, where the idea is there. I'm just learning how to translate the idea downwards so that even a child can understand. The rochev and the width of the idea is understanding the depth and the applicability of the idea, how far reaching each and every idea is, and how every prat in Torah is connected to every other prat in Torah, and that the Torah is impoverished in one place and rich in another place. And when I grab hold of this element of the idea, the Torah can extend itself by way of horizontal growth, where one idea in that sugya and one idea in that sugya are all now going to be unified together. So that's the length of the idea, the ability to translate the inner kernel of the idea across disciplines, meaning to say to minimize it into bite-sized, manageable metaphors and analogies so that the idea in it itself can be grasped, but the idea is not extending itself. It's not being applied in different ways. It's just being conveyed in a different levush. And then there's the hisravchus of the idea, the bina of the idea, which is going to be the ability to extend the idea across the boundaries of thinking. It's not drawing it down further and further, trying to make it more understandable. It's rather seeing the true extension of the idea and how far reaching the idea is. And then the omek is going to be the inner kernel of the idea itself, prior to the extension of the idea by way of oirich, as well as the extension of the idea by way of rochev, prior to the ability to translate an idea in an analogy from one level of understanding to another level of understanding, as well as the extension of an idea from its singular point to a further territory. There has to be the idea itself, the thing itself, which is the emergence, which is the omek of the davar. So that's the das. So there's chachma, bina, and das. There's the orich, there's the rochev, and there's the omek. And even though das appears to be lower than chachma and bina, meaning to say that the omek in this notion would be seen as something lower than the length or the width of something. Nevertheless, we know, and Rav Hillel Parcher makes this very, very clear in his biur, that das really holds access to Keser, and that the ability to unify the paradox of Chachma and Bina that is applied on the lower level of das is in truth rooted in a far loftier perspective of Das Elyon, which is the light of Keser, because in order to unify two opposites, the thing that's unifying has to come from a higher source. And even though das appears to be the result of Chachma and Bina unifying themselves together, in truth, das is just the externalization of the inner process of Keser, which ensures the functionality of Chachma and Bina and at the outset. So even though there's the Orech, there's the Chachma of the idea, and there's the Rochef, there's the Bina of the idea, and then there's the Omek of the idea, the depth of the idea, which is das, nevertheless, the Omek of the idea in and of itself, prior to application across the boundaries of analogies from above to below, or the extension of territory from one side to the other, there's the depth of the matter. And every muskal has these three things. It has the thing itself, it has the ability to describe what this thing is across the extension of territory, and it also has the ability of abstracting the inner essence of the idea and sharing it with another person, even though they might not have the grasp of the same language. So now the Mitteler Rebbe is going to describe these three elements, which are going to be accessed through iyun, through pnimius of bina, through hispoinenus, which is not accessible to a person when they simply look at things externally. Zok the Heilige Mitteler Rebbe. Harochev hu bechinas hezber hamuskal lechol tzad bepratim harbe keroichev hanaar veloi devarim kehavyasam levad kenahar katzer. When we look at the rochev of something, the elongation of something by way of width, rechovas hanahar, the bina, it's the explanation of the idea, it's the application of the muskal in every direction, in accordance with all of the many particularities, just like the width of the river, and not the original idea in and of itself, which would just be the river itself. The river itself is the orech, that's the chachma. The rechovas hanahar is the application of the idea by way of horizontal growth, where I say, oh, this sugya in halacha says one thing, it also means something in Shas, it also meant something in the Rishonim, it also meant something in the Achronim, it also meant something in the process across disciplines. One can see how the same kernel of the idea can be extended horizontally to give us a full spectrum of the depth of the idea. That's the rochev of the idea. And the oirech, and the length of the idea, the chachma, is otsem yurida sahaskala lahalbish es hamuskal b'mishalim shoinim ad lahaviu bahasagos tinok katan. The notion of oirech is the depth, the intensity rather, of the ability for the muskal to descend down across levels by way of the levushim and the garments that are applied by way of haskala, meaning the thought principles and the ability for the mind to apply metaphors that can convey the essential nakuda from one level to the next. That otsem yurida sahaskala, the intensity of the ability of the muskal to descend in accordance with the levushim and the garments and the metaphors, which is levush, the metaphors to the original kernel of thinking, ad lahaviu lahasaga satino katan, to the degree that even a child can understand that that's the depth of chachma. Kenahar shahoylech umitmashech laorich, like a river that descends down from above. Kamashakasav ba'arichas haksavim be'inyan oirech hayariya. The oimek, and the depth of the matter, hu ka'oimek hanahar shemisham misrachev hu ba'atzmo eno rachav klal aval hu ikar etzem hanahar v'nikra stream v'hu ikar merutzas hilucho me'makoro. So what the Mitteler Rebbe is doing over here is giving us an explanation of the oimek, the roichev, and the oirech of a davar muskal in terms of understanding a river. There's the river itself, which is the natural flow of the stream, which doesn't need an extension of space, but it would simply be the ability for something to descend from above to below. That's the ability to apply the idea across the boundaries in accordance with analogies and metaphors that even though they are speaking to the kalim and the levels of the student and the lower levels, nevertheless, they still contain the quintessential idea as it applies on the highest level. The water doesn't change from the highest point to the lowest point, but it doesn't need to be extended from side to side. It's simply the vertical descent from above to below. That's the river itself. Then you have the Rechovas Nahar, which is the extension of the river. As that singular flow of the river extends itself over time and it extends its boundaries from the left to the right, to Yama V'Kedma, Safona V'Negva, it crosses boundaries and it extends its territory, and that's the Hisravchus of the Nahar. That's the ability to apply the idea in different angles of my own thinking. It doesn't mean to convey this singular idea as it was conveyed down to a lower level in the form of a metaphor. It's simply the extension of the original Nahar and the revelation of how deep and wide that Nahar can go. But the Omek, the depth of the matter, is the point of emergence, the stream from whence the river emerges. And in that place, it's like the Omek HaNahar, the depth of the river, from whence the river grows forth and from whence the river widens itself. But in and of itself, the emergence of the river is not wide in itself, but rather it represents the ikar etzem hanahar, the essential possibility of a nahar, shehu ikar merutzas hilucho me'mekoro, which is the intensity and the essential emergence of the water from its original source. V'hamayim sha'al gavav, and the water that rests on top of the omek hanahar, which is the source of the water itself, whether it's bagova, whether it's the elongation of the water and the water above it, which is the secret of the oirich, or if it's the extension of the water litztadei ha'omek that go to the sides, which is the rochev, to the sides of the depth, tefelim elav, the oirich and the rochev, the chachma and the bina are tafel to the oimek, which is the das that's mushrosh and keser, because without the das that's mushrosh and keser, there's nothing to contemplate. That's the etzam hamuskal. And then once the etzam hamuskal is there, then I can access the oirich of it, which is the chachma of it, to see how it ascends above and descends down below, and to see the bedazzling nature of Chachma that has the ability of taking the profound kernel or an idea and allowing it to express its quintessential essence in the same unchanging way, in spite of the fact that the Levushe HaSeichel and the metaphoricity and the application of the ideas descends in accordance with the level in which it is being explained, as well as to extend through the Hisravchus of Bina, through the Oimek of Bina, to come to be Mishta'ashea on the Torah and the depth of the Torah, which is Rachva Mayam, which is wider than the sea, and that once a person contemplates even a single tiny part of the Torah, they can be mishta'ashea with the entirety of the Torah. Both the orich and the rochev, the Simcha and the Tainug of Chachma and Bina are both talui in the oimek hamusag, which is the ikar merutza silucho mimakoru v'mayim, and the water that is above it and to the sides of it are all secondary and incidental in relationship to the depth of the matter. She'eno rak bechinas hiskabris is pashtusa bilvad. Meaning the extension of the essential nakuda of the river, of the muskal itself, which is the idea in and of itself, which is not something that is subject to explanation, but rather it's the point of emergence where the idea descends down from Chachma itself into the realm of Bina. That is the essential thing. The extension of something above in a vertical way or to the sides in a horizontal way, in the Oirich and the Roichev and the Chachma and Bina are all secondary and incidental to that. Bechinas etzem nikudaso. The oimek hamuskal, the secret of das, is etzem nikudaso, the essential point of thought itself prior to the application of thought. It's the muskal that a person knows prior to knowing anything whatsoever. Kamoshahu, as it exists in and of itself, v'nikra oimek hamusag, and it's referred to the depth of the matter that is being contemplated, something that will never be revealed in language, but rather gives birth to all language. Shekol mashin es pashet behezber hahasaga l'chol tzad b'roichev gadol b'kamei pratim v'chein oirich ba'otzam hayaria hu bechinas ha'asaga l'chosad b'reichiv gadol kama pratim v'chein oirich ba'otzam hayaria. Sorry, I read the same sentence twice. Lamala lahaskil mimenu oid lamala mimenu harbe. That the etzem nekuda, which is the idea in and of itself, which is referred to as the oimek hamusag, the depth of that which can be grasped, that everything that extends from it, whether it's to the width or the length of the application of the ideas, all of the possible particularities, they emerge from that etzem hanekuda, and it goes all the way, all the way, all the way, all the way above, and it goes all the way, all the way, all the way, all the way down. Ad bechinas oimek rom. Now the Mitteler Rebbe is describing for us over here the fact that This etzem nekuda of thought has the ability to ascend up and to ascend down. It has the ability to extend itself wide and to contain itself inwardly. But in relationship to the extension of the idea, how the etzem hanukuda of thought is what gives shape to the ability of translating that idea across the boundaries of disciplines in accordance with translating things into understandable metaphors that are meaningful to each and every person in accordance to their own lived experience. That ability to ascend above and to ascend down below is in truth wedged all the way, all the way, all the way above and all the way, all the way, all the way below. The secret of the Oirech, because for the Mitteler Rebbe, the hyper focus on Bina always puts us in a position where we're going to come to, God forbid, run the risk of seeing Chachma as something that is almost deficient because it lacks the intensity that Bina provides. And that if a person comes to contemplate the intensity of the Ani of Bina and the intensity of the severity of thought, and we come to highlight the benefits that come with it, especially when learning the Mitteler Rebbe. So we run the risk of forgetting about Chachma. We run the risk of coming to think that the Chachma, the original thought and the original unity of something, is something that is of a lesser level than the Bina itself, Chas v'shalom. We know that Bina enables Chachma to reveal itself in a new way that would not have been possible without the Bina itself, but the Tachlis of Bina, the Tachlis of Ani, the Tachlis of self, is always to come to a higher level of nothingness, is always to come to appreciate the depth of Chachma and that which remains inaccessible to us. So when we're talking about the Oirich, the Roichev, and the Oimek Shebechol Davar, and we're relegating the Oirich of something, the depth of Chachma, to simply the application of things by way of metaphor from one level to the next, we run the risk of belittling the value of Chachma by just relegating it to the role of metaphor making or applying ideas across boundaries. And this is what the Rebbe Rashab writes about in Sefer Ma'amarim, Pei Reish Taf, in Daf Tzadi Tes, why it is that Chachma, which is much higher than anything we could ever contemplate, is relegated to metaphor application. And what the Rebbe Rashab implies and what the Mitteler Rebbe is going to highlight for us over here is that we're not coming to minimize the depth of Oirech. We're not coming to minimize the wondrous applicability of the idea across disciplines and across levels in accordance with metaphors. Even though metaphors seem to be simply like child thinking, nevertheless, the secret of the mashal is the ability to really abstract the inner kernel of the idea and to ensure that the inner kernel of the idea survives its own death, which is the extraction of its idea from its original habitat, and the sudden tchias hamesim of that idea when the inner nakuda of the idea comes back to life in a levush that's different than its own. That's the secret of metaphors. That's the secret of mishalim. Al ken yomer hamoishlim bo cheshbon. The moishlim, the secret of a metaphor, is the secret of tchias hamesim. An idea dies and then it comes back to life in a context that is different than its own, but it still reflects the innermost nakuda of the idea. And that is tali in the koyach ma. That's tali in the bittul of chachma. And so now when the Mitteler Rebbe is explaining how the oirich and the roichev, the depth and the width, the chachma and the bina of the idea, all emerge from Oimek, that Oirech of Chachma, that application of metaphors, is only the level of Chachma within the realm of Bina. We're already dealing with Hispainus, and therefore the notion of Chachma within Hispainus, the Chachma within Bina, is this notion of the metaphoricity and the application of one level to the next without kind of losing the essential shape. But that koyach of the Oirech, that ability to translate across boundaries, which in its true source is far greater chiddush than the extendability of an idea by way of a vertical growth, which is Bina, and the extension of the idea, even though we're implying that Bina is higher, nevertheless, this ability of metaphoricity is rooted in Chachma itself, is rooted in Ayin, as we're going to see that all of his Baininess is ultimately trying to draw out the invisible, impossible depth of Chachma into applicability so that we can unify Chachma with Bina and then go back into Chachma with a higher level of Keser. So over here, even though we're talking about Oirich, even though we're talking about the applicability of metaphors across boundaries, which seems to be a minimal level of kind of the utilization of the mind, nevertheless, the Mitteler Rebbe here is reminding us the profound levels of what it means to be able to apply something in horizontal growth, not horizontal growth, vertical growth of from above to below and from below to above. And here the Mitteler Rebbe is hinting to us what it means that really the etzem nekuda of the thought is all that exists, and that the extension to the width and the extension of length, the chachma and the bina, are emergent from the etzem nekuda. And so here the Mitteler Rebbe is going to reveal the depth of what it means to access that place of chachma. that lahaskil mimenu, the etzem nekuda is something that a person can come to understand. Oid lamala mimenu harbe. It gives us the ability to ascend upwards as well. Meaning to say, metaphoricity and the application of metaphors isn't just from a higher level to a lower level, but it also applies from a lower level to a higher level. That if I understand the sugya on the level of atzilus, so to speak, then I can come and understand this sugya on the same level of Adam Kadmon as well. This is what the Leshem came to do for us. This is what the Rashash and the Taras Chacham came to do for us. This is what the Rebbe Rashab reveals over and over, that just as I can see an idea and apply it to a metaphor below so that a child could understand it, I could also abstract it back above. And that's the secret of Omek Rom and Omek Tachas. Rom and Tachas, above and below, the depth of above and the depth of below imply verticality. They imply above and below. They imply an oirich orientation, an elongation from above to below. And that elongation from above to below doesn't just mean that I can draw an idea from a higher place down to a lower place, but it also means that I can take an idea from a lower place and abstract it back up to a higher place. The Arizal uses this svara all the time, Hamagid me achris rashis, that a person comes to understand something on the lower level and they come to understand intuitively that the same process is taking place on the higher level as well. And so over here, we can experience the etzem hanekuda, and not only have the ability to extend it below by way of metaphors, but we can also understand od lamala mimenu harbe. We can also ascend above the idea itself to higher realms, and we can come to abstract the idea and see how it applies on higher realms as well. Ad bechinas omek rom, and then we can come to the depth of above, or the transcendent depths, the secret of the awakening of water above, where the water below awakens the water above. That's what took place in the Zman of the Mabul, when we take the ideas down here below and we extend them all the way above. The opening of the wisdom that took shape in the time of the Mabul, which was meant to be the opening of Shemayim in Shnas Tafresh in 1840, so to speak, that in the days of Mashiach, in the world of spirituality, which was represented in the Shnas Tafresh L'Chayei Noach, as the Zohar Kadosh says, is Pachtu Mevoyin de Chachmasa, that the storehouses above of wisdom opened up. What are these storehouses of wisdom? Again, Chachmasa is the Oirich over here. So the Chachma is not just to go from above to below, but it also has the ability of going from below to above to open up the Mevuin de Chachmasa, the ascendant Oimek Roim of Chachma, Hainu Ma'ayanos Tahom, the depth of above, the depth of below, HaChachma Sheyiskabru Lamala Mala, that the Chachma should open up more and more above, V'yachasu Kol Haharim, and it should cover over all of the mountains, which Rabbi Nachman says stand right in front of us, blocking our eyes. V'aruvas HaShamayim Niftachu, and the storehouses of above open up, Lahamshich Min Hamayim Sheme'al Hashamayim Hanikra Oimekrom, to draw down water that is above the Shamayim, which is referred to as the ascendant depths, Shatalui B'mayim Tachtonim, that are dependent on the Mayim Tachtonim. Ki na'utz tchilasam b'soifam tchilasam b'soifam, k'moy ha'emek sheila oy ha'gava lamala k'moy shekasuv b'ksavim. V'ha'kol nimshach me'etzem oimek hanukuda shenovea min ha'chachma hanikra ayin. And over here, the Mitteler Rebbe is wrapping up this idea for us, which is where we're going to end for today, prior to looking at an idea from Rav Hillel, is that the Mitteler Rebbe is really, and I'm understanding this, if I think I'm understanding it for the first time properly, is that the Mitteler Rebbe is reminding us that the Oirech and the Roichev, Chachma and Bina, the application of an idea from above to below by way of translating it from its external shape and maintaining the quintessential nakuda and allowing it to go down a level so that that quintessential nakuda can still be understood to a level that doesn't necessarily have the grasp of the original levushim, to do a real transplant where the inner essential point maintains its semblance and doesn't lose anything. It's not simply making up metaphors. It's the precision of metaphors that conveys the exactitude of the idea so that within the metaphor itself, I come to grasp that which is being described. And then, as well as the roichev of the idea, which is the taking of the quintessential of the idea and not translating it, but rather extending it and seeing how ultimately this idea can extend beyond its framework and beyond its particularized context and be extended across the horizon of my thinking. All of those abilities stem from the very existence of the idea. The idea itself, that thing which I know most intuitively, but is not something that is subject to revelation, even to myself, only by way of the tzimtzum of the mind of Chachma and Bina Bina and the extension of a mashal from above to below, as well as the extension of the idea across the territory of the mind, all of that is just a commentary on the Etzem Nakuda. But what the Mitteler Rebbe is hinting to is that when it comes to Chachma and the ability to apply metaphors, because Chachma is rooted in the true place of Chachma, so the application of metaphors is not simply a one-way street. It doesn't just mean that the teacher conveys the ideas lower and lower and lower so that the student can understand it, but there's nothing happening to the originality of the makor of the idea. But the secret of metaphors is that that by conveying the idea below, that awakens the oimek Rome above, and that allows more chachma itself to be unfolded, which allows me to extend the point of thought that I had even to higher levels. And so a sugya that I understand in a world of one level can be extended above to higher levels as well. Sof davar. Nevertheless, in the end of the day, what we're looking at is the three elements of thinking that are inherent within each and every moment of consciousness. The possibility of experiencing the roichev, the oimek, and the oirich. And all of this is within the realm of Bina. This is what hisbaininus is. And where does hisbaininus come from? Where does hisbaininus come from? What am I contemplating? Just as we said before, not to think that Bina is something higher than Chachma. We were before talking about the Chachma within Bina, but where does all of this come from? Hakol nimshach me etzem me oimek nekudaso. Everything comes from the oimek of the nekuda, the emergence of the nahar. But where does the emergence of the nahar come from? We understand the oirech of the nahar, we understand the roichev of the nahar, which are coming to comment on the oimek of the nekuda of the nahar. But where does the oimek of the nekuda of the nahar come from? Zak the heilige Mitteler Rebbe, shehu novea min hachachma hanikra ayin, nahar yoitzemi eden, eden is chachma. All that we're talking about is the yesh and the ani of Bina and the particularization that is emergent from within the original whole of chachma. We're not denying chachma, we're drawing out that which is latent within chachma that can only be emergent through the principles of Bina. Bina is the process of the interiority of Chachma taking shape externally. And so everything that is emerging out of Bina, which is the oimek hanahar, which is the nekuda of the nahar, the roichev of the nahar, the application of the nahar across the horizontal directionality of extending thought, as well as the verticality of the idea, the ability to translate the idea from one level down to the next, as well as to awaken levels above the level that I'm at. All of that is emergence from true chachma, which is ayin. Bina is the yesh me ayin. And just as chachma is also referred to as yesh me ayin be'erach keser, so too Bina is the yesh and chachma is the ayin. And therefore chachma is inaccessible to us. All we can do is iyun, is drawing out the depth of chachma, which is referred to as ayin. And that's where the emergence of the nahar comes from. The emergence, the oimek nahar, is the lowest part of chachma that comes down. And from that point of the nahar, which is what comes out of chachma, then we're going to extend that irreducible point that comes down by way of the width and the length of the ideas, by the way of applying metaphors, of drawing it down from one level to the next, as well as extending it across the territory of thinking so that it conveys its true depth. That's the secret of the nahar hayotzemi eden. Bina is the nahar and chachma is the ma'ayan. It's the body of water that is perpetually moving forward, kiyadua. V'hu nikra iyun, and this is what iyun is. Iyun is the bina that draws out the light of chachma by way of descending down into the oimek and the and the oirich of the idea. This is what's referred to as iyun, sha'oimed al davar hamuskal uma'ayon by harbe, that I stand upon the idea that is being conveyed and I contemplate it and I descend down to it and I descend down into it over and over and over again. V'hu ha'ikuv hepech ha'mehirus, and this is the stoppage of thinking, the arresting of thought, rather than the speed in which thought typically takes shape. I have to pause myself in order to come onto the depth of the matter, the depth of the muskal, as it stands in its inner interiority, the toich tocho, and the inside of it, dafka. That's what I'm searching for. Just like someone who's looking at something with their eyes, not just by glancing over it very quickly, but rather allowing my eyes to be open and to have my gaze caught by the matter and to spend time contemplating it until I come to understand it deeply with all of the various parts that compose it internally, and the inner interiority of it. And this is what hisbaininus with a doubled nun is. Dafka, it's a doubled nun because it's the first nun and then it's a doubled nun. I have to look twice. I have to descend down into Bina to be misbainin. It implies the fact that I'm doubling over. It's a doubled looking. Dafka, dahainu shemes boinenu ma'ayon by harbe, that I have to spend so much time, and even when I think I'm done looking at it, I have to send down even deeper to it. Shapirish Rashi be iyuni. This is what Rashi explains. Be iyuni. What does iyun mean? La amoid al hadavar lahavinu al bayrav. To stand upon the matter so that I can properly understand it. Nimtza. It turns out bechinas ha'iyun hazeh. This element of iyun, which is the oimek and the oirich and the reichev of bina that emerges from the particular point of chachma that extends itself from ayin, that iyun is just the aspect of the kli lebechinas ha'amaka de bina atzma. That iyun, which is the extension of the idea from above to below and the extension of the idea from the right to the left, is ultimately just the kli, just the vessel in which I open myself up to the depth of the matter, which is the nekuda hapnimis of bina, which is that silent point that is emergent from the ayin of chachma. And that's what we're going to stop at right now. We're going to stop at this understanding of the Mitteler Rebbe as to what iyun is and what his beinus is, and what we're trying to do when we talk about thinking. We're not going to go through all of the writings of Rav Hillel right now, but just one point that Rav Hillel Parcha is really pointing out, something that we've spoken about and something that we've made clear intuitively, is that Rav Hillel Parcha writes as follows. He says, we have to understand the depth of the matter of hispoinenness. What is its essence and what should I be mispoining? And Kodem Kol, says Rav Hillel Parcha in Os Aleph, Hine mitchila yesh lahavin. First and foremost, we have to understand Mehusa hispoinenness. Why are we even talking about hispoinenness, which comes from Bina? Ki l'chayra ina muvan lama talu ha'ikr behispoinenness shu b'chinas Bina v'lo b'chinas chachma shu l'malam b'chinas Bina. Why are we even beginning with the notion of Bina? Why are we starting with the depth of an inner hearing, which is Shema Yisrael, going down into the particularity, as opposed to the vision of Chachma? Why start off with this blindness to begin with? Isn't Chachma higher than Bina? And furthermore, this is not simply a Kabbalistic thing. This is explicit in the Torah itself, that the Ikar framework in which we grasp HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. Shema is Bina. Bina hears. Chachma sees. I can see something in its totality. I hear things at separate points. And the Rav Hillel Parcha goes through the fact that it's ultimately only through the secret of Bina, that enables me to grasp the beauty of each and every particular, that allows for a riboy gvanin hamehudarin hamimuzagim b'maziga nachayna, that allows all of the particular hues and colors of thought to emerge into a beautiful kaleidoscope of images, like Rabbi Nachman's description of the Heichal HaGvanim HaMishtanim and the Achdus HaPashat, the singular unity that is emergent out of the frames of many changes. The gift that comes about by all of the riboy changes and the shifting of thought, which comes about as a result of Bina, which is the halbasha and the hargasha of my mind, that's going to enable me to come to a depth of chachma. And listen to the words of Rav Hillel Parcha. He's saying, when a person grasps, when a person grasps the entire purpose of descending from Chachma into Bina is ultimately to reveal the beautiful quality that emerges from all of the particularities, which are the result of the many shades and hues of grandeur that come about by way of the particular connections of thinking when connections are done properly, that at which point those connections can find expression within feelings, which prior to the expression within feelings only existed in the letters of the mind without the ability to be expressed. But only once I go through this process of descent into the particularities, I pick up the letters, which are the element of Bina that come about through the revelation, and I can enable myself to speak something out, and that's how something comes down. Without Bina, we don't have accessibility to the idea. It's only through Bina that we have the ability to grasp. It's only through the oimek, the oirich, and the roichev that we come to grasp the depth of what's taking shape. And Rav Hillel Parcha also explains, when it comes to this breakdown of oimek, oirich, and rochev, that kihine bechinas oimek, eno muhus klal, rakshu bechinas eschabrus me muhus lemuhus, ube'etzem hu bechinas ayin kamei keren shemechaber shnei adfanos, the mizrach udarim shekol ma sheyitzayru, eze muhus shayach ledoifin mizrach uledarim, or ledoifin darim, rak bechinas ha'ayin hu ha'machabrim v'hu nikra keren. This is a very important nakuda. And with this nakuda will end. we said that his boinaness is grabbing hold of the etzem nekuda of Bina, which is Yotze May, the ayin of Chachma. It's the secret of Havein b'Chachma, the emergence of particularity from within the wholeness of Chachma, which applies itself in the secret of Chacham b'Bina. And then we come to find the Oimek, the Oirich, and the Roichev of Bina. So we know the Oirich of Bina is the applicability of metaphors that enable the idea to be translated from one boundary to the other, above and bidirectionality, above to below as well, in the secret of Chachma. The Oirich is the Roichev is the extension on the horizontal level of seeing the depth and the applicability of the idea on the same level, not trying to translate it across lower levels, but rather to extend it on the same level to show its elongation in terms of territory. And both of those are just commentaries and ways of grasping the essential point. And we said that essential point is the point of convergence, where the bottom of Chachma begins to be the top of Bina. And Rav Hillel Parcher is just giving us more of a way of understanding what exactly this Etzem HaNekuda is, because it's that which is not subject to language. It's not something that is graspable, as Rabbi Nachman describes in Sichos Aran Os Aleph. Listen to the words of Rav Hillel Parcher in his Biurim over here. We have to understand the secret of Oimek, Oirich, and Roichev. But for now, what does it mean, the Oimek? What's the Etzem HaNekuda? The essence of the depth of the Nekuda, Einu Mahus Klal, it has no existence of itself. Rakshu Bechinas Hischabrius Me Mahus Lemahus. It simply represents that liminal point of encounter between one essence and another, between Chachma and Bina. It's the point of convergence between Chachma and Bina, but it doesn't represent anything in and of itself other than the connectivity between two opposites. Ube'etzem hu bechinas ayin, because in truth, it's rooted in nothingness. It's nothing. It's emergent from Chachma itself and beginning to be the somethingness, but it's not yet something. It's still the shorish of ayin. It's like a corner, kamokeren shemechaber shtei hadafanos, that connects two walls, the Mizrach and the Darom. That anytime I'm trying to understand to whom the corner belongs to, I will be stuck. It could belong to this wall and it could belong to that wall, because in truth, it's nothing other than the connection between the two walls. And so too, Bein Hashmashos. Bein Hashmashos is also like this in time. We have it in space, in the corner, and we have it in time in Bein Hashmashos, which is the Bechina of the Ayin HaMechaber Laila V'Yom. It's a secret of nothingness that connects nothingness and somethingness day and night. Shu Eino Muhus Zmani Klal, which in truth is not an existent form of time. Ki Kol Ma Sheyachlu L'Tzayer is a Zman Shayach L'Yom Laila. Because any time that I can contemplate and define where the time is emergent from, so then it's susceptible to being defined as either this wall or that wall, day or nighttime. B'mashal ruchani yoter merav hamashpia seichel letalmid shemuchach lios b'mashpia b'chinas ayin shehu hanochas atzmis or sichlo haruchani hameviu lehislabshus b'seichel shelafi atzmoi kli hamakabel. That so too in any spiritual process, at the point of convergence, the higher level will always have a point of revelation, which is a revelation of nothing other than the possibility of revelation, just as the receiving end will also create an element within itself, which is nothing other than the receptibility of receptibility, the openness towards receiving, and it's that yichud of those both parts that are nothing in and of themselves that contain and combine both levels. That's the oimek of the davar. That's the secret of the keser. That's the secret of Reishad Lo Osyada. That's going to be mechaber chachma and Bina. And Be'ezras Hashem, we're going to continue. I want to hear feedback, if possible, in any way, because I don't want to extend further than we can. A person can spend their entire lives reading the first and contemplating the first teachings of Rav Hillel Parcher and the teachings that he brings from Rav Yitzchak Isaac Hamler in his biur on Shaar HaYichud. So we have to go slow, but we also have to move forward. So Be'ezras Hashem, this is how we're going to do it for now, and we will continue next week with a furthering into the process of emergence of Bina from within Chachma itself. Be'ezras Hashem.